guys, this is Andrew with High Level Reviews, and today I'd like to take a look at Grandia. The game was developed by Game Arts and initially published by ESP Software on the Sega Saturn in 1997, and eventually by Sony when it came to North America on the PlayStation in 1999. Much of the same staff from Game Arts' previous project, the Lunar series, returned to work on Grandia. The stated goal of Game Arts in general was to provide consumers with good experiences in games rather than to follow market trends, and the game received near universal acclaim when it was first released on the Saturn. Despite an enormous outcry from strong online RPG communities and several gaming websites like GameSpot, the Saturn version of the game was never released internationally. It took 2 years before it was released on the PlayStation, and despite game critics panning of the voice acting, it held up quite nicely and was compared favorably to the RPG juggernauts of the time, with some even suggesting that Grandia was more worthwhile of an investment than Final Fantasy VIII, which came out only a few weeks prior. Grandia is a lighthearted tale that focuses more on slow and sometimes adorably awkward character growth, which matches many of the main character Justin's interactions with his party members. It is delightfully silly, lighthearted, and even when darker themes are explored, such as human sacrifice to appease the wrath of a dragon, the game's tone remains upbeat and playful. Though the game might not wow a player looking for deep philosophical musings, that would have significantly bogged down Grandia's narrative and detracted from its admittedly sometimes mawkish message of growth, solidarity, and exploration. The game starts in the port town of Parm with Justin and Sue, his friend that acts as a surrogate sister, both getting into a bit of mischief around town, though Sue, despite being all of 8 years old, is clearly the more level-headed and cautious of the two. I'd probably assume that all of the frying pan hits to the forehead Justin takes from his mom might have necessitated Sue's presence as a caretaker. The pair eventually decide to investigate an archaeological dig site that is also being occupied and searched by the Garlau military force. Justin runs into a holographic device that displays the image of a woman called Liette. She explains to him that his spirit stone, an artifact left to him by his long-missing adventure-seeking father, holds great power. She also informs him that he must seek out the ancient city of knowledge Alent to learn about the stone's potential. Justin and Sue eventually board a ship to the New World and end up encountering the renowned professional adventurer Fina. The trio end up taking on what appears to be a ghost ship before arriving in New Parm and meeting Pecan, an insane pervert trying to marry Fina without her consent, and coincidentally the leader of the Adventurers Society. You end up spoiling his plans and convince Fina that exploration shouldn't be controlled or dictated by an organization or an individual. The first half of the game is a wonderful and carefree romp rife with adventure and touching displays of character connections. Grandia's story is often bemoaned as one of the weaker aspects of the game, and frankly, I found that to be a bit harsh. Though the story is more straightforward than most JRPGs and does contain a plethora of tropes and cliched situations, it also does a good job of subverting plenty of expectations, such as a central character that is so far from the typical chosen one trope, and it eventually matures, along with the characters, into an examination of how myths are dispersed and how they vary depending on a group's experience and circumstances. It's one of the few games to build a believable and coherent mythos with a thoroughly detailed history. The subtleties of this history are innumerable and mostly well done. For instance, various towns have slightly different interpretations of the myths, and most of these interpretations are explained through geological or cultural differences. It's a vastly underrated story and world, and even if you're not into examining myths or ancient civilizations, there is more than enough silly slapstick humor and clumsy teenage moments, often perpetrated by Justin's ineptitude with the opposite sex, to keep you entertained. Grandia's fighting system might be one of the more enjoyable ones I've ever experienced. It's fast-paced, tactical, unique, simple enough to pick up but with lots of depth, and best of all allows you to prepare your actions based on a bar at the bottom of the screen that shows turn order and actions being prepared, which is kind of the staple of Grandia games. There are several options during combat, and each has its uses and ideal situations, though it can be tricky to determine when those situations are. Comboing allows you to put out a lot more damage and is the most common command against your typical monsters. But as you face more difficult beasts and bosses, you must learn how to properly time a critical strike. Criticals do less damage than combos, but interrupt enemies' actions or push the enemy's progress back a bit, and is one of the major aspects of combat that distinguishes Grandia from other RPGs. It's hard to adequately detail the satisfaction of successfully canceling or delaying a huge boss's actions for multiple turns. And in order to vanquish some of the more trying enemies, this is an almost required task. Defending, unlike most RPGs, is very beneficial in some situations as well. Game Arts made sure that nearly every option has its uses and potential for tactical employment. Magic and skill usage is also handled in a distinct and complex way. Characters learn new abilities by repeatedly using weapons and spells. That is, after the player uses a mana egg to unlock a school of magic on a particular character. New skills and spells are listed in a menu, and the player is easily able to track his or her progress. As you use a weapon or magic spell and it levels up, you also gain statistical improvements that are specific to weapon types and magic schools, further encouraging diversification on characters to cover up potential weaknesses. For instance, leveling up your water skill gives the character plus 1 HP and plus 2 MP, while leveling up the dagger skill, if your character is able to use daggers, increases agility and HP. The weapon-based abilities use SP, while magic uses the traditional MP. Magic is also divided into tiers, probably to keep the player from spamming very powerful spells that are accessible early in the game. And each tier has its own MP reservoir to pull from. As you progress and your levels get high enough, you start to unlock certain combo abilities that combine magic schools for powerful abilities and weapon skills that infuse magic into a move. While the tedium of grinding out schools of magic to get powerful abilities or mindlessly spamming combos to skill up certain weapons could have been a huge beatdown, I simply didn't suffer that in Grandia. The combat is so frenzied and intense, and timing so important that I rarely hit that much maligned battle fatigue. It kept me engaged even during long and trying grind sessions, and if you want the stronger abilities, you will be grinding. There's just no escaping that fact. I do wish there had been more optional bosses to really push the limits of this system and the player's ability though, because while I definitely stayed engaged, it wasn't often that I genuinely feared defeat, even during most boss battles. Even so, Grandia's combat ranks among the best RPGs. Grandia's field is displayed in a 3D polygonal 360 rotational view, much like Xenogears, while characters are displayed in 2D sprites. You can also occasionally interact with environments, such as running into baskets and buckets, and hear the clinging and rattling of things you've hit. It's a nice touch. There is a little bit of palette swapping with monsters, but it's not terrible, and the designs are typically pretty entertaining, and sometimes downright terrifying. It is also worth noting that the PlayStation version saw a bit of a graphical downgrade compared to the Saturn, but it's not really all that noticeable and doesn't affect gameplay outside of a few lost frames during some camera rotations in towns and dungeons. But this doesn't last for long. The few FMVs served merely to enhance and further articulate the world rather than tell long or obtrusive stories, and so I didn't mind them when they came. I also really enjoyed the anime style. As for the sound, Noriyuki Uedari wrote the music for Grandia and claimed that Grandia's soundtrack was a turning point in his career. He previously worked on Game Art's Lunar series. It was a mix of orchestral and synthesized music, and he relied heavily on classical influence but was able to incorporate a variety of other styles into the mix. Though the overall quality on the PlayStation version did suffer a bit due to compression and compatibility issues, it's still a gem and contains some of Uedari's best work. The voice acting, contrarily, swings wildly from annoying but tolerable to almost insufferable. Luckily, the voice acted scenes aren't terribly common outside of some frustratingly repeated catchphrases during battle. Admittedly, some of the voice actors sound more trained and comfortable than others, but because of their infrequency as the game progresses, the voice acted scenes start to feel more out of place and tacked on. Voice character interaction should have the opposite effect and should feel more like a reward than a punishment. Though criticisms of the game range from the young age of the main characters to the always sunny tone of the game, and what some felt was a story that was too linear and simply didn't take any risks. And admittedly, the game really could have used some kind of a diversion or minigame. By midway through the first disc, it falls into a very familiar pattern of go to new place, talk to new people, complete a dungeon, and repeat. However, it's really easy for me to look beyond these flaws and see the vibrant and deep world, the excellent characterization, and if all else fails, one of the more rewarding and addictive combat systems I've ever played. I'll definitely be completing my reviews of the numbered Grandias sometime soon because this series is just too good. If you enjoyed the review, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. My Twitter is also located right below the video. This has been Andrew with High Level Reviews, and I appreciate you guys stopping by.